arms crossed, outstretched, symbolising a desperate cry for freedom. Channel 4 News has obtained these images from Eritrean migrants and refugees imprisoned in a Libyan government-run detention centre near the town of Zintan. Homemade banners written with tomato paste daubed on blankets spell out their plight. These people say they are slowly being killed while the world turns its back. Channel 4 News previously has covered these detention camps. They are where Europe-bound migrants caught at sea by the EU-funded Libyan Coast Guard are locked up. In some cases, corrupt guards conspire with human traffickers to abuse the detainees for ransom using social media. Other centres have been directly attacked by local militia seeking to rob or press gang the inmates to fight. Despite all this, the facility here in Zintan is seen as the worst of them all. Over 20 officially confirmed deaths since last September bear this out. We spoke to a 22-year-old Eritrean called Tesfai.
In Zintan we are dying, starving, hungry, sick. A lot of people are developing mental disorder. I can explain my feeling. I can control because of we are dying.
There are 26 migrant camps in Libya. Most are clustered around the capital, Tripoli, or near coastal cities. But Zintan is 170 kilometers away by the mountains in the desert. Isolated and forgotten, it's a place of malicious and deadly neglect. This, for example, is the morning queue for drinking water. The taps in Zintan are opened by the guards for just 10 minutes a day at 4 a.m. Inmates say they only get 1 cup of water each. And in this footage, the wait proves too much for some of the desperately thirsty men, and a fight breaks out. No one here has seen outside sunlight for months. All food is delivered through this small hatch. Detainees told us that they get 1 small tub of couscous or plain pasta like this per day to share between 2 people. Consequently, man-made famine-like conditions are taking hold. The people here are starving. But the authorities don't care. In this camp, the guards barely bother entering the detention hangar itself. And these stomach-churning pictures show maggots and worms infesting a huge pile of rubbish and rotting food. The guards allowed it to build up in the inmates' living area over a period of weeks. Here are the toilets, a collection of plastic buckets for over 650 people. This malign neglect has led to epidemics of diseases like pneumonia, scabies, diarrhea, and worse. All these men, for example, have tuberculosis, easily treated with a 6-month course of antibiotics. But for months now, no one with the right medicines has visited Zintan. And 22 people have died through medical neglect since September, including an 8-year-old little boy from Gambia called Abdul Aziz Zabuka and his father. The migrants blame the UNHCR for abandoning them to their fate, but the UNHCR told us that NGOs had recently tried to help, but the Libyan authorities impeded them.
Our access is restricted. We're not able to access every individual or every part of the centres. There is no detention centre in Libya suitable for hosting refugees and migrants. No time should be lost in securing the immediate release of all those currently being held.
Channel 4 News has obtained these images. They show the faces of some of those who've died in Zintan. These people had committed no crimes. All of them were Eritreans, officially registered as refugees, supposedly with the right to safe asylum. The European Commissioner with responsibility for migration told us recently what he thought of the Libyan camps.
Dire. It's a disgrace for the whole world.
At the moment, the European Union are funding the Libyan Coast Guard to, in effect, transport refugees and migrants to the centres you think should be shut down. Do you acknowledge the sort of dark irony of that? Do you acknowledge that?
Yes. It is an irony, also in my eyes, but I can tell you that our interlocutors on the ground are not the ones who run the detention centers, but IOM and UNHCR.
Back in Zintan, the detainees' protest ends with a collective cry of rage and despair.
We are detained in the hall. We are praying in sleep. At this time, we hopeless, desperate. Let me recommend for all the people of the world to know our pain. A lot of people are dying in the detention center with untold history, underage, innocent refugees.
All these people think they have been left here to die, and unless things change soon, they could very well be right.
Warwick O'Brien there. Well, earlier I spoke to Rupert Colville, who's the spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, and I started by asking him how this was being allowed to happen in Libya.
Well, I think it's a product, unfortunately, of the sort of chaos there is in Libya. It's also the whole issue of the migrants and refugees has really been catastrophic for a very long time. So you have a situation, for example, where the Libyan Coast Guard has picked up around 2,300 people since the beginning of the year who've been out at sea, and then they get put back into these detention centres, into these awful conditions. And that's, of course, completely unsatisfactory that that's happening.
You talk about it being a product of the unrest in Libya, but it's also surely a product of this policy backed by the European Union to fund the Libyan Coast Guard to take these people back to these dreadful camps.
Well, yeah, we've said, we've done a lot of reports on the situation in Libya over the past couple of years, unremittingly awful picture, basically. And we've made recommendations to the European Union and the individual EU member states that, if they have cooperation with any Libyan institutions, they must ensure that those institutions are not violating human rights of civilians and migrants and refugees, whoever. But it doesn't really seem to be working. And when you see the conditions these people are living in and the conditions they're being sent back to, it's really atrocious. And there's another detention center in a place called Al-Khoms, where we're really worried because, they returned 203 people there just a couple of weeks ago. And now we understand there are only 30 people there, and we don't know what's happened to the rest of them.
There are a lot of people acknowledging that the situation is terrible, but nobody seems to want to take responsibility for it. So the EU Commissioner responsible for migrant issues told us just last month, it's not down to us, it's the UNHCR who are on the ground. He seemed to be suggesting it was the UNHCR who needed to do much more. And that's a perfectly good point of view, isn't it?
Well, UNHCR is a different agency to my own, and I'd have to let them speak for themselves. They have evacuated people from Zintan, but I was on a podium this morning with one of their spokespeople who said, the trouble is we evacuate some and then more are brought in, and so it's like a sort of hamster wheel. You get some people out, and then other people are brought into this, identical ghastly situation they have, where you have, rampant tuberculosis in the camp and nothing being done about that. But, for agencies, it's not easy operating in Libya. You have a very difficult security situation. So it's really beyond the powers, I think, of UN agencies, of NGOs, single-handedly to solve this.
If you have a country where, law and order breaks down, the structures break down, this EU-backed policy, do you accept that the consequences, intended or otherwise, effectively mean now that refugees who are fleeing either face the threat of drowning or being sent to one of these camps where they will face disease or even death? And that is those are the consequences of this policy.
I think in many respects, yes, that's absolutely right. And it's an awful situation. It's not simple to sort out. I mean, I think we should be clear. There's no magic wand that could be waved that would sort this out. But I'm not sure countries that have the power to help are perhaps pulling their weight as much as they could. And certainly if they're, for example, in cooperation agreements with the Libyan Coast Guard, they need to ensure the Libyan Coast Guard is not simply putting people straight back into this kind of situation.
Which is clearly what's happening.
And really people should, yeah. Yeah.
Rupert Colville, thank you very much for talking to us today.